I spoke to him last at 7 p.m. that night, and he had told me he was going to send me pictures of the lake. So at 8 o'clock, I had not received pictures. For some reason, I was like, what is going on? So I texted him and I said, Pix, are you okay? That is the first thing that came to mind, and I got no response. And then 15 minutes later, I called him and it went straight to voicemail. And then I called him 5 more times to see, like, is he picking up? And then I felt something's happened. I just felt it. I knew something had happened to him. And the whole time, as I was holding my son, carrying him across the street, I had a voice in my head that said, you're now a widow and the kids have lost their father. And so as I'm talking to my sisters and they're like, do you want to say a prayer? Like, I see police lights outside my house. And when he said, does Brent Lane live here? I just lost it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Dr. Liza Barros-Lane on the show with us today. Liza, a professor of social work at the University of Houston, specializes in young widowhood, a reality she knows all too well. At 36, she became a widow, left with a 3-year-old son. In addition, Liza founded the Young Widowhood Project, an organization dedicated to advancing research and raising awareness on this often overlooked experience. With my maternal grandmother having been a young widow with small children, I'm interested in understanding the complexities of this type of loss and, more importantly, how we can support those who endure it. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now, let's go talk with Liza. Dr. Liza, thank you for taking the time to come join us today.
Thank you for having me. I've been so excited.
Oh, me as well. Please tell us how you became interested in studying young widows.
So I got my PhD in social work. I finished in 2018 at the University of Houston, and I was studying trauma-related issues and the lived experiences of vulnerable and marginalized populations. And so I already had this research background when in 2020, when I just started as a professor at the University of Houston downtown. July of 2020, my husband, who was the psychologist, Brent Lane, he was feeling a little antsy because of quarantine and COVID and everything. So he decided to buy a boat that was new to him, an older boat, but new to us, to just be in nature, get out. And so he bought it on a Monday and he went to try it out on Friday. And within like an hour of him being at the lake, or 2 hours, the police was at my house letting me know that someone had found his boat and that he was missing. So they had found his boat in the middle of a lake. And so 2 days later, his body was found. And that is what started this whole, it took me some time to catch my breath, right? To actually even figure out what I could do, what I wanted to do as a result. But I began to realize there is so much that is not understood or known or talked about in the literature in the way that is meaningful to me as a widow. There is research on young widowhood, not much, but there's some. But it's really describing what's happening to the widows versus like, this is what it's like to be me, And so I decided I'd like to start looking into widowhood research, and that's what started this whole thing.
Tell us about your husband.
Brent Lane, like I said, was a psychologist. I just found a video that he had made for his psychology practice, which he called Yellow Rose Counseling, because it had that strong Texas connection of Yellow Rose. And he was just a kind, sweet, good, intelligent person, supportive, always very encouraging, and he worked a lot with grief and loss, actually. And so he was also very wise and grounded. And, I know that people idealize people after they die because we try to hold on to the better parts of them. But I think that in hearing so much of what people said about Brent after he died, things that I didn't know he was even doing, like he would write notes to every single one of the clinicians he worked with that worked in his practice and would leave them a note saying, hey, you're doing great. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I made you some tea. I left the light on for you. Like just little things that and every time he would pay them, he would send them a thank you note for what they were doing. So he was like bigger than life. Just a really, always seeking to do good, to have fun. He was pretty irreverent, which, you wouldn't realize that because he also worked with such heavy topics of trauma and death, and especially deaths by suicide, survivors of suicide. He worked a lot and he could handle it. He could handle it. He was like, I was like, does that ever stay in your mind whenever you're on your own? And he's like, no, I'm there with them in the moment. And then I leave and then I go do other stuff. So just a wonderful human being.
And when that police officer was at your door, tell us about that. Give us the cliff notes without re-traumatizing yourself.
Yeah. So do you want to know like the leading up to it? Because there is a story that leads up to it. Okay. So I spoke to him last at 7 p.m. that night. And by 8 o'clock, and he had told me he was going to send me pictures of the lake. Because I asked him, I told him, you haven't sent me pictures. Like, well, I haven't been out there. I would never be out there without sending you pictures. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So at 8 o'clock, I had not received pictures. And I'm not someone that is really good at keeping track of time. I have like time blindness. But for some reason, I was like, what is going on? So I texted him and I said, Pix, are you okay? That is the first thing that came to mind, and I got no response. And then 15 minutes later, I called him and it went straight to voicemail. And then I called him 5 more times to see, like, is he picking up? And then I felt something's happened. I just felt it. I knew something had happened to him. And so I called his best friend, and I asked him, do you know exactly which lake he went to go try the boat at? Because I was very preoccupied that day because I had been tested for COVID, and it was my first time ever getting tested for COVID. I was kind of scared. And, his best friend was like, "I think he might be in Lake Houston. Do you want me to go check? It's 30 minutes away from my house." And one thing about me is I don't like to bother people. I don't like to ask for favors, but for some reason I was like, "Please, like, I'm so sorry to ask you to drive 30 minutes." And the reason I couldn't is because I had our 3-year-old son that I had to put him to bed. And so I was at my parents' house and we lived across the street from my parents at that time. And I said, well, while he's going to go check on Brent, I will take my son and put him to bed. And the whole time, as I was holding my son, carrying him across the street, I had a voice in my head that said, you're now a widow and the kids have lost their father. You're now a widow and the kids have lost their father. And I was just shaking inside. And so but I was like, what if I'm just making this up? What if it's just my anxiety, right? So I took my son to bed, sang to him, did all the things that Brent normally did with him when he went to bed. And then I called my sisters. And I told my sisters, I don't dare call Brent's family because I don't want to scare them. But I have a bad feeling something's happened to Brent. And they were like, oh no, do you want to do a police report? And I was like, yes, but I'm so scared. I can't even remember his license plate or anything like that. And so they said, why don't you where can you find on your computer? So I logged into our Easy Tag, which is the toll tag system thing that we have in Houston, and I realized that he had exited the Lake Houston location while I was on the phone with him and had not come back. So my heart just dropped. I was like, "Oh my God, like he's there. That is where he is." And so as I'm talking to my sisters and they're like, "Do you want to say a prayer? Like I see police lights outside my house. So when the police came, I already knew. And when he said, "Does Brent Lane live here?" I just lost it. And my sisters were on FaceTime. My parents were across the street. And I remember this being this almost like a slow motion movie. And I'm out of my body and just screaming. I don't even recognize my own behavior at the times. I was just in so much pain and panic. And the police was like, I didn't tell you he was dead yet. And I'm like, but I know. But I know. And so that's how I found out that he was missing.
How did you know he was already gone? Had you ever had a voice in your head like that before?
Okay, no. Is it okay if I say some of the stuff that happened leading up to it?
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
this is the first, I'm very much like I used to be very much what I receive in like my senses. You know what I mean? Like haven't really trusted intuition as much. I didn't know what it was, and you're always you start to question yourself, and I think that being a scientist doesn't take away your belief in intuition, but I'm used to reading things that I can observe. You know what I'm saying, and taking that information in, and so a couple of things happened leading up to a probably in the 6 weeks leading up to his death, that there's just too much evidence that I cannot refute. So the first thing was that, one night I was asleep in bed and I woke up, like, I think, like, at 3 in the morning with this trepidation that I needed to learn how to parent my son on my own. Because out of both of us, my husband was the better parent. He knew how to play with him. He already had a child that was 11 years old. It was my first kid. And I was like, sometimes I'm like, I don't know how to, be fun. I want to be fun too, just like he is. And I was on Amazon just buying toys for my son and I to play together. And my husband woke up at 5 and I was crying. And he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I just have this heavy feeling that I need to learn how to parent Roswell on my own." And he was like, "You got me, babe. Like, just watch me. I can make game with a box. Just watch what I do." And so that was the first thing that happened, that looking back, I was like, "Oh my God," I was starting to get a feeling. So then maybe 2 weeks after that, my husband, we went to bed and he got up to watch a movie on his own, a zombie movie. I didn't like to watch zombie movies. They scare me. And so I was asleep and I rolled over, and I was a hard sleeper at that time. When my husband was alive, I was a really good sleeper. And I rolled over and my hand hit the cold bed, and it was like this reverberation in my system, like, oh, like, and in that moment, I knew he was dead. Like, it was without a doubt my husband was dead. That's what I felt like at the time, 1 month before he actually died. And I was like, I woke up in a panic, and then I thought, "Oh my God, that's, thank God, is not true. He's really not dead." So I started sobbing and sobbing, and I got up and I went and told him, and he turned off the TV. And it was really funny because he was the more romantic, gentle one of both of us. But at that time, he was like, "I'm watching a zombie movie, and you're here bawling your head off, telling me how much you love me." And so I was like, "I just want you to know that if anything ever happened, um, I wouldn't be able to really go on without you. I love you so much." And I had this experience, and I'm hugging him, and he's doing the little awkward pats on my back, which made me laugh because I was like, this is so not like him. But he was like, "Nothing's going to happen to me." So that was 1 month before he died. And then 2 weeks before he died, we had this conversation. We normally had these check-ins in our marriage. How are you doing? Are you happy? What do you need? And he was like, "I really would love it if you made me brownies. Like, that makes me happy. It makes me feel loved. And I love back rubs." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, okay." So that same day, I ran to the store to grab, brownie mix. And I kept it there when the spirit moved me. I said, "When the spirit moves me, I'll make it for him." But I had 2 packs of brownie mix. And the night before he died, I was analyzing data for a paper that actually was published shortly after he died. And when I'm doing analysis, I don't like to be bothered. I have a hard time concentrating already, so I focus on what I'm doing. And I had this voice inside of me that said, "Make him the brownies." And I was like, "Oh, okay, this is weird because I'm analyzing data right now." But I made the brownie mix. I stuck it in the oven. And I remember while I was sticking it in the oven, I was thinking, "What am I doing? This is so strange." So I stood by the stove the whole time the brownies were in the oven, analyzing data. I'm just like looking at it because I just didn't. I was so stressed out with the timeline that we had to submit this paper. And so I brought him the brownies like around 10 o'clock at night, and he was like, "Oh, thank you, babe. What is this for?" And I said, "I don't know. I just want you to know that I love you. Remember you told me?" And he was like, "Oh, thank you so much. This is sweet of you." And so then the next morning, I woke up an hour early, and I thought, "Yay, my son is not going to wake up for another hour. I have an hour to code." And a strong voice inside of me said, "Be intentional." And I was like, "What?" Like, I was sitting up in the bed like, "What?" And it said, "Stop. Be intentional right now." It was very punctuated. And I said, "Be intentional with who?" And then there was no answer. So then I looked over to my husband and I said, "Oh, I guess I need to be intentional with him." So I tapped him and I said, "Hey, are you awake?" And he was like, "Yeah." I said, "Can I give you a back rub?" And he was like, "Why?" And I said, "I don't know. I felt like I need to be intentional with you right now. That's what I felt right now." And he said, "Oh, thank you. Okay." So I started giving him a back rub. And while I'm giving him the back rub, he told me that he had a dream the night before. And he said, "I had a dream that I went somewhere in the dark. And when I woke up, when I got to it and light came on, I was in the most beautiful place I'd ever seen in my life. And we were all together. And to me, these things that I've shared with you are like, I've never experienced anything so strong, and I've never experienced obeying them and being so grateful that I listened, because I have zero regrets about the last day, because I listened to everything that came to me at the time. But then things continued. And he told me this dream he had that looking back was a gift, because for me that has made some meaning of like that there was a pre-existing plan, that this was gonna happen, and it wasn't like just random. That is very hard for me to deal with just from a trauma perspective, you know? And so that day also at 11 o'clock as I was coding, I had this urgency to go check on my son across the street, which again is not something that I would normally do because I'm like head down coding. So I took my computer across the street, and then my mom said, "Hey, can you get some vegetables for your sister-in-law? I'm making her some soup because she has COVID." And I said, "Well, I'm about to have a meeting." And she goes, "Okay, well, can you stay with your son while I go to the store?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely, I'll stay." And my son came running. He said, "I want to see daddy." So I FaceTimed my husband, and it was the last time that we all were four of us together, you know? And so at around, my husband was gonna take the boat out to try it out at 2 o'clock, before 2 o'clock, because he had to drop off his son, my stepson, at his mom's house because they were gonna go on a trip by 2 o'clock. Well, the guy who was working on the boat that day did not finish in time for him to take his son. And so he dropped his son off and he called me and he was really irritated. Like at 4 o'clock, he called me and he said, "This is so annoying. This guy took so long, all this stuff." And I was just commiserating with him, right? And then at 5, he texted me and he said, "I want to revise our previous conversation with some insight." He said, "I'm grateful for the means, the opportunities, and the people I love." So something struck me about what he said. I'm like, "Oh, this is really deep." So I called him and I'm like, "What is this message? What are you trying to say here?" He said, "I don't know. I have a really strong feeling I shouldn't be complaining about my life because my life is beautiful. Like I just have a strong feeling I shouldn't complain." And I was like, "Well, okay, you don't have to, but if you want to, I'm all ears. Like whatever you want that will make you happy, I'm here." And so then I spoke to him again at 7. And so then I'm kind of going back to the getting this feeling. This had never happened to me. Or if it had, I had not listened. And so this is the first time, and this to me has been a turning point of listening to these, like recognizing that intuition and that these messages that have no physical evidence, but they have evidence because it happened over and over and over. And you can't refute that. Like that was a turning point for me in this kind of like belief about receiving like messages.
Who do you think sent the messages?
I think God. Yeah, that's my opinion. God or angels or guides. I don't. I felt, but the one message that I felt really that was from God was stop and be intentional right now. That one felt very like, you have no idea how important this moment is, and I'm trying to spare you. Like that one feels to me. The other ones I don't know because some of them, like especially the one that you're a widow, he's dead. Now that was scary. It was a scary, but I think it's a scary reality. You know what I mean? So there's no kind way to tell me, that I'm gonna be a widow or that I am a widow already.
So you had multiple premonitions, and
Yeah.
he was having premonitions too, although he probably wasn't aware of it, but he followed his intuition as well.
Yes.
And what a gift for you and
Yes.
your son.
Such a gift.
Yeah. Have you, in your research, run across other women who have had a similar situation before their husbands passed? They've run into anything like that?
I've seen, not in my research, that is something I wanna ask. I do want to ask, but I have seen that in other people's research where they say that, like, and I resonate with that personally, where they said that people in hindsight realize that they had premonitions, and so that they're grateful because that allows them to make meaning of the death. I think what they find is, like, the hardest thing to deal with is to feel like something is so random and so meaningless. Like there was no reason for you to die like this or to die at this age. But when you have premonitions and you listen to them or think about them in hindsight, you start to feel like maybe there was a larger purpose. I don't know it, and it doesn't make this existence better or easier, but it helps to have some peace, that it wasn't just completely meaningless and random and, like this world is just this very terrifying place.
So what do you think the bigger picture is with all of this happening? Certainly you founded your Young Widowhood Project, and that's serving people around the world, and we'll get into that more in detail here in a couple of minutes. But what do you think the bigger picture is here for Brent and for you? Was he the catalyst for you to start this project to help all these women around the world? Do you believe that that's part of the equation?
I think so.
I do too.
I think that Brent and I, we were co-laborers in life, in mental health, in supporting people and trying to, I mean, I was a therapist in his practice when he died. I stopped seeing clients when he died. But we had a lot of compassion, yeah, and have a lot of compassion for people suffering, and wanting to be a part of relief for people. And I remember in the weeks after COVID started, talking and saying, when all this is said and done, almost every family we know will be touched by death, and we need to do something to help people. And thinking like maybe we could do some pro bono grief work, maybe. And I've never loved grief work because I've had a lot of unresolved deaths growing up, so that always felt very tragic to me, very painful. And I had not done my own work. But I was like, well, yeah, I guess we need to be doing grief work because people are going to need support just to survive their lives without their loved ones. But Brent really loved that work. He felt, he helped people prepare to go to the other side. Like he worked with in nursing home with older people and people saying like things I've never told anyone since I was 5 years old, but I was abused when I was younger. So they were saying things like that to him and he was helping them cross over. That was part of his work here. And so when he died, I felt like his mantle was passed on to me in some ways, in a different way, like in my own flavor of things. I would not have approached grief. I would not have done this had he not died, And so I feel that like Brent understood a lot of, I mean, he knew what young widowhood was. I remember him having a client that had been young widowed. And so I learned a lot about young widowhood from him.
Wow.
And then after he died, some of the things that he told me, I could reference back specifically, like the being afraid to die because then your kid has no parent. Like and also the very vivid, terrifying memories of body stuff and that kind of thing. Like that was something that I learned from him. That when they happened to me, I felt they were horrifying, but I also felt like at least he knew. He understands me. He would have understood me if he were here and been my counselor. He would have understood me. So I do feel that like that mantle was passed on to me and his wisdom continues to resonate within me and his compassion, like I feel like some of that was left behind with me and like he took some of me with him.
Mhm. Yeah, you were being led.
Yeah.
Lots of steps along the way, like on a stone path. You were stepping from stone to stone to stone to stone is what it seems like to me. So how did they finally find his body, and what did you ever figure out what happened? He went out at night?
He went out in the evening. So it was summer. So it was still light outside. So he said it was going to be a 30-minute run. Just try the boat out 7 o'clock at night. And he was going to try it out. And nobody saw what happened. We still do not know. All we know is that somebody found the boat. And because of that, there was this confusion, at least in my mind. I was so, like, part of me knew he was dead. Another part of me was like, was he kidnapped? Like, what happened? Like, where is he? I mean, his boat is here. And so there was all this search parties on land and on water, and just going back and forth, back and forth. And I think that they located his body so he went missing on a Friday night. I think Saturday evening they located his body, but did not tell me. Like there was a bunch of us there at the lake, and one of the people who was in my group said, I think she didn't tell me, but she told me later that she said, I thought they found his body because they started circling this area, and then they stopped and came to talk to me, and they said, we want to be the ones to find him. We'll be the ones to find him. We don't want anyone else to find him. And even in that moment, although a part of me knew he was dead, I was like, do you think he's alive? And they like looked at each other like, and they're like, we don't know. but we'll be the ones to find him. And I was like, okay, So that next morning at 6:30 in the morning, they had sent drones out from Hobby Airport, which is close to, I mean, I guess that's where they have the drones for the search and rescue or search and recovery. And um, EquiSearch. The people from EquiSearch went out with one of our friends from our church, who is the fire chief from Galena Park, and he went out with them, and they're the ones that found the body. So that they called the medical examiner. The medical examiner said, "Just hold it, like don't let it drift off anywhere else," because there was a lot of like trees. It was not a good, obviously not a good scene. It's hot in Texas, So so I never did get to see the body. I think we talked about that before. I didn't realize that I even had a choice. There was a lot of like, no, no, like do not come. Like, so the police called me, the chief detective, and he said, we don't want you to come out. Tell everyone not to come. And then talking to the medical examiner, they're like, no, don't. And the funeral director was like, no, don't see the body. So nobody knows what happened. Just the autopsy report is. I don't know what I was hoping for. I was hoping for answers, and I think I was hoping to connect back to him too through the autopsy report, and maybe that would bring him back. I don't know, but when I read it, it was just this sterile description of the body, and that the conclusion is that he drowned. Which I'm like, okay, and but by that time, they can't tell why he would have drowned. Like, was there an embolism? Was there a heart attack? They don't know.
Heart attack.
Yeah, you think heart attack?
Yeah, that just came in. How old was he?
43.
Yeah, heart attack. He threw a clot. Uh, oh, I can't even imagine. Tell us about your son. How how do you break that to a child, let alone a little child who doesn't have a good understanding of even what that means? I mean, certainly you had lots of experience from a clinical perspective, but when it's your life and your child, where do you go from there?
I really didn't have experience, even clinically. I stayed away from death. I really did stay away from death. And what's interesting that you're asking this question, because my colleagues and I'm second author on this paper that we're about to submit within a month of what are the challenges of parenting as a widowed parent. And the first challenge is breaking the news to your kid.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
I my son is bilingual, Spanish and English, and so bilingual children tend to speak later because they're taking in all this information, and then they all of a sudden like erupt in language. So he was a lot more nonverbal at the time. So I, first of all, didn't want to tell him. I was terrified. I didn't even know how to explain missing. He did hear me screaming and crying when the police came. And so my dad went into his room and he was like, "What happened? What happened?" Like he was asking, and then I went to the room and I hugged him and he said, "What happened?" I said, "Nothing. Everything's fine." Which in hindsight, I wish I hadn't done that because it wasn't helpful. But the first instinct of a parent is to protect your kid. Like I do not want to I know that I will be the one to have to break the news and destroy your life. And I don't want to do this yet because I don't even know what's happening. So I went to the lake and I stayed there till midnight, and then I came back and I left very early in the morning. I was there all day till the evening, and my son spent the night at my parents' house. And so they found my husband's body on Sunday, and so everybody had been asking me, "How's Roswell doing?" And I felt so much shame that I had not told him. And looking back now, I knew that I wanted to protect his existence until I possibly could. Like I knew the moment I told him it would shatter his world, and as a parent, you don't wanna be the one to put the dagger through your kid's heart. It's traumatic. It's traumatic to be the one to give those news, and it's traumatic to watch your kids grieve and to have the shock that you've also received. And so someone gave me some advice while I was at the lake, and they were like, "Well, we don't know if this is gonna happen or not, but, you need to tell them, like, give no hope." Like, they have to understand they're not coming back, the body doesn't work, like, give no hope. And I know that's true because if you think that they might come back, like, it will really confuse and jeopardize the grieving process. And so, when I came home, that was, on Saturday, Sunday. Monday morning is when I decided to tell him. And when he woke up, and I was just dreading the moment he would wake up. And my twin sister was there with me. And we both felt like, "Who's gonna rescue us?" And we're like, "No, we're the adults. We're the ones that have to do this." So I picked him up, and I just said, "Something really terrible has happened to daddy. He was in an accident. His body no longer works. Daddy's never coming back home, and you're never gonna see daddy again." You know? And my son just got this really angry, shocked look, and he looked at me like, "What?" And I didn't even know if he understood me. But he just, like, he cried a little bit, we held each other. I was hoping that I'd die of a heart attack before I had to tell him, like, I did not wanna do this. And then he got up, went in front of my stepson's bedroom, and just fell asleep on the floor. It's like he just collapsed. And then when he woke up, I'm like, "I guess I gotta tell him again because I don't know if he understood." So I picked him up again. I'm like, what I said earlier is these are really sad news. We're never gonna see daddy again." And he looked at me angrily again, and that's when I realized, okay, I think he did understand. And so an hour later, my friend was there, and she was changing him, getting him dressed, and he said, "My daddy's dead." He told her that, and so it's the most brutal thing. It's the most brutal thing because you're reeling yourself, but then to watch your kid also like that, I I I feel like parents really have a lot of secondary trauma, and the children have secondary trauma watching us suffer too. So it becomes this family thing that is just very difficult. And you do a lot of work around children's grief, I know with books that you've written and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
all grief, and that's why the children's books were written because I had so many clients who either had small children or were grandparents of small children saying, "How do we explain this?" And they say, "Grandma's in heaven now. Grandma's died. Grandma's in heaven." And they're at the visitation, and the child who's 3 is saying, "No, she's not. She's asleep in that box up there in the front of the room." Or how do children know that it's their deceased loved ones that are coming to visit them and they know information about them that there's no way they could know because these kids are too little, they don't even read yet. And then how do kids know stuff about past lives? So you're right, I have 4 children's books and then my big angelic attendance book that, that helps everybody that grieves. Has he talked about that his daddy that he talks to his daddy or he is there anything like that that's gone on?
yeah, at the beginning, especially, there were several things. I remember, I think a week after the funeral, my sister was driving us um, to her side of town, which is 45 minutes away. And all of a sudden, my son was like, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." And he starts pointing up at the cloud. And he said, "Daddy's right there. Daddy's right there." And of course, I just burst into tears, because it was just so emotional. But I would hear him sometimes at night laughing, and he's like, "Oh, daddy, you're so funny." I heard him say that one time. Um, he also would say that daddy was sitting on the roof, and I was like, "Daddy standing?" He's like, "No, sitting." Like, he wanted to make sure it's sitting. So there were things like that that happened. Um, there was one particular moment that was I don't even know how to explain it, but we were all in bed because after my husband died, I started sleeping with my son because we were both left so terrified. And my son, I had originally thought I needed to do the same routine, put him to bed like my husband would, but he could not sleep. He would just roll around calling for me, and my heart would just break. I was like, I can't. Like, he needs me, I need him. Like, we just need to we're so scared together, and we can maybe have some comfort, especially him, as I still couldn't sleep with him, but he could sleep if I was with him. And so, one night we were laying down and I was sleeping, but in my sleep, I felt like I was almost hovering over my body, and I was watching my son and I on the bed, and Brent, our son, and I were together spiritually outside of the body. And we were just hanging out. And then Brent told me, "He needs you, get him." So in my sleep, I grabbed my son, I grabbed his arm, and he started screaming from a nightmare that he had had. So it was like this very interesting, co-parenting. I knew that Brent was watching over Roswell and warning me, like, he's gonna need you right now. So, and I just held on to him. So, that was not something that my son Roswell experienced, but it was about Roswell. But Roswell it's become a lot less now that he has these experiences, even though I've always validated them. Because I know that if you don't, as they get older, they start to lose that connection, but it was a lot more frequent. He was younger.
And he's how old now?
He's 7. He's about to be 8.
He's 7. God love him. Oh, how wonderful. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for sharing that story, and what a tearjerker. I just commend you for all of your courage, that just on a personal level, to get through all of this. And then parlaying that grief into something so productive to help all these other young widows and their families. And I'd like to pivot and get into that some more. Why do you think people are so uncomfortable with death and grief and, that whole thing? It's like, okay, there's a time to grieve, and then it's been long enough. Okay, get on with your life, kind of a thing. Have you run into that yourself and also in your research?
In my research, more so than even in myself. I I think I think that people have this perception of wounds as healing and closing, of this being something that just heals, and then one day you're all better. But there's no real resolution, because you continue to miss this person. And so it's not the same as in the early days, or if you have prolonged grief, in that, like, just that the misery of wanting them in the present moment. That's like why it's so anguishing initially, is that yearning, but then it becomes missing, and it's less jagged. It's less heartrending. It's still painful though. And people, I think, because they see this like very marked change between you're despondent and then you come back to life, you come back and re-engage with life, that then you're all okay. It's this black and white thinking. And you might be okay. That does not mean that you don't miss this person, that there's still something you have to learn to live with as you get older, as you realize, oh, we would have been doing this, he would have been a part of this milestone, that kind of thing. Um, but definitely the widows that I wrote a paper on disenfranchised grief in young widows, and some of the things that they've experienced is, first of all, that because you can repartner, then it's all good. You're good. You're fine. And so because you're, yeah, well, thank God you're young enough. And some widows said that, like, they're at the funeral itself, people are like, well, thank God you can remarry, as if that will erase the years together, the love you have. It's a very painful process to even start re-engaging in the romantic part of your life again, because it's a human need. So you do it only because you're kind of forced to, like, you're forced by your own need to have connection to do it. But it's hard. It's so hard.
People said that to you at his funeral?
People, not to me, to widows that I have interviewed.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
gonna
not to me.
say.
No, people have been very good to me. I've been very lucky. I've been very lucky for the most part. I mean, I've had a couple comments here and there, but nothing like what you hear from widows. So that's one of the reasons why people in young widowhood disenfranchise their grief, is like, well, you can repartner, so it's kind of like, just kind of, you know, like, one's out, the other one's in, kind of thing. And it doesn't work like that. People can really, really love a new partner and have all the space for a new partner and still very much feel the empty, gnawing pain of the old partner's absence. That, like, you have to learn to exist with both realities. The other thing that they tell, it's about, like, timelines. Timelines is a big one, being able to replace the person. I'm trying to think, there was another one, but it's kind of, oh, yes. It's about, they're told, because they see you as being very strong because you're having to move forward, and people, they get a lot of praise for, like, look at you, you're so strong, thank God. And I think people do that because I think it's very painful as human beings to see other people broken. So you want to see them as strong. You want to see them like, oh, the good, you're doing well. But they're not doing well. And so people are like, I'm strong because I have to be. I didn't ask for this. This is not my choice. I'm heartbroken inside, but I have to kind of, like, just endure through for my children. And so they feel very unseen in that aspect of like, how hard this really is, and it continues to be. And why are we death phobic? I don't know. It's so weird because I still continue to be death phobic even now. I think it's because it hurts so much. I just can't imagine anything worse than losing people we love. That's permanent. That is, and there's many other losses and there's traumas and all that stuff, but I don't know. I kind of feel like losing people you love, I don't think there's anything worse, and there's no fixing that, and that's terrifying for people.
Have you talked to his spirit through a medium or through somebody else? I know that research shows that that's very healing when we lose a loved one, and I do it all the time with my
Yeah,
clients, and we'll talk with deceased loved ones, and they're usually every time, all the time, 100% of the time, they're funny, they're joyful, they say things that lets their loved one know that it's really them with whom they're conversing, and it really not only brings closure and peace to the situation, but it brings a levity that I think is much needed as well. Have you
yeah.
have you done that yourself?
I did, and so this is a hard part for me because it doesn't there are things that you do when you're grieving or ways that you become that you're like, "Is this me?" Is this your identity begins to shift very rapidly, and so I grew up in a religious tradition that was very much against the mediumship, experience, and but when Brent died, I was so desperate. I was so incredibly desperate, that I did talk to someone, and it was, as you said, there was a lot of, validation and grief but and it was very and she was evidentiary, like, so she's just told me all these like, it started off with, you know I sent some young male, "I see this heart above y'all, that means that you were romantically connected," and I said, "Yes," and she was like, "I don't understand this. He was out in nature in the evening by himself, but then he falls down into this wide expanse and he cannot breathe. I don't understand what happened." And I was like, "He drowned." She's like, "Oh, that," because she was like, "I don't understand the whole falling down and not being able to breathe thing." And so, but there were things that came in that were both heartbreaking, but also there was levity. She was seeing signs of him like pulling on his hair like this. And she was like, "He's really into his hair. He keeps pulling his hair." And I'm like, "No, he is not actually into his hair." For some reason, he loved when I had like little curly cues on my sideburns. I don't know why he liked those wispies. And I'm like, I knew that's what he was trying to tell me. He was like, that kind of thing. And um, she said something like, he's laughing because he said your son used the restroom where he wasn't supposed to. And it's true. My son had just pooped on the carpet. And I was so embarrassed. I was like, "Oh my God, how could you, like, what were you thinking?" And it was at my sister's house. And so there were some things like that that were helpful. I think the main thing that were funny. I think the main thing that helped me from that interaction was to know that he was okay. To know because like he died in the way like his biggest fear was dark water and he died in a dark lake. And so that really
Do you think that was a premonition too on his part?
I wondered.
Yeah,
I've wondered
yeah.
because it's too horrific. It's too like it's too ironic to not feel like, but that was his biggest fear. Every time we drove over, there's this big bridge in Houston over the ship channel, and I would be like, "Can you drive over the other way?" Because I've always been afraid of just like, what if the car falls over? I've always had those kind of weird thoughts. But he was like, "Can you imagine the dark water? It's so terrifying." So I'm like, "Stop adding more things into my intrusive thoughts." So he would be driving and I'd have my hand like this so I wouldn't even look at the water. Like I was that like nervous about it. But it wasn't because it was dark. It was just like the fear of like the car just, going over the bridge. But he was always afraid of dark water. And so to me, I was so traumatized that he died in the very way that he was terrified, that when she said she was like, "He didn't like dark water. He didn't like that, did he?" I'm like, "No." And she said, "He said to tell you it wasn't that bad." You know?
What I get from that, Liza, is that he had other experiences in past lives that involved that. And then as we go through subsequent lifetimes, there's always a semblance of a script that plays out. And so he was exploring it in this way, in this time, in this version, all of that. Different set of variables, same basic script.
Oh, so, like, you think he might have had, like, experiences with dark water in the past that brought fear for him, and he said, I'm gonna face that again here.
multiple lifetimes. And so he experienced it in a different way with a different set of variables because it was a different time. It was a different set of circumstances, but it was still the same outcome. And what I've seen in my non scientific research, just in working with tens of thousands of clients and doing a lot of past life work, I do scans. I don't hypnotize anybody. I just have a whole technique that I use that's instant. And then a scene will come up and we'll know where it was, when it was, what the year was, all that kind of thing. And it's been my experience that it's all related. And so they're looking at it from a different perspective. Okay, maybe he died in dark water in the ocean on a ship, a sea, voyage, kind of a cargo ship or something in the 1700s. Maybe he was a Viking. Who knows what the scenario was, but he wanted to explore it this time to see the different nuances of it. And we look at that from our human perspective and we're like, why in the heck would anybody choose that? And yet, the analogy I like to use is if you think of Hamlet, how many times has Hamlet been performed since Shakespeare wrote it in 1602? Who knows? Certainly, same script, different perspective. Where was it performed? In what language? In what year? What was happening in the world? Was this person an actor, a director, a set designer? Was the performance inside, outside? All those different variables come up with a different experience. And so, since time doesn't exist in the spirit world, time's a human creation, these lifetimes can be a nanosecond based on our understanding of time. And there are lots of schools of thought, and I've heard yes from spirits, thousands of them over the years, that say we do exist in multiple lifetimes concurrently. And that makes my head want to explode because I don't understand that from a human perspective. So I go to the place of, well, it makes sense to me eventually when I'm in heaven. Is it feasible? Yeah. Do I understand it? No. Well, I understand it when I get back to heaven. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, thank you for saying that. I've had the same idea because I've heard that like you make decisions that you want to explore this or, and I'm like, if I made the decision to have this much loss and trauma in my life, when I get out of my body and I go to my soul, I'm gonna slap her around a little bit to my oversoul and be like, what were you thinking? Like, why have you put me through so much in this lifetime? You know, um, I did have somebody tell me she's like, this could be your last one if you want it to be, but you're gonna have to really jump off this suffering path and go on to like a less I'm trying to remember what it was that she said, but it was just interesting to me because I was like, There's been just so much, an overwhelming amount of trauma in my life, which is why I first became a social worker and why I study people going through traumatic. I'm very and even the widowhood stuff, I really observe and try to parlay to others. This is what it's like to suffer in this way for these people. Like just kind of like be a voice of empathy for people going through certain experiences. And I wonder if that's part of the plan, right? Is you go through suffering and you understand there's a lot of nuance to it, so then you want other people to understand just why people tend to struggle so much after they go through experiences like this. Like this is nobody wants to struggle like this. Nobody wants to feel this way.
But you're shining a light on it in a different way now. And you've been through this horrific pain yet again. God only knows how many lifetimes. We can find out when we're done recording if you want. But but you're creating out of that pain something that is a bright light for people on a global basis, for women and their children on a global basis in this day and age. Before we didn't have the internet, before there were a lot of women that didn't go to college because it wasn't the accepted practice, let alone get a PhD for God's sakes.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so my guess is, and I'm hearing a yes from spirit, is you've been through all of these experiences in many lifetimes and they've all been heart wrenching. You've learned from all of them. This one, you're like, okay, guys, I got it. I don't need to experience this anymore. What can I do to help others on a global scale, and you got that alphabet soup at the end of your name and all those degrees, so that gives you credibility, and you have the experience of being a young widow yourself with a small child, which gives you even more credibility for people to really pay attention to what you're talking about. It's an amazing opportunity for you to change the zeitgeist, I think. I mean, I know you're being led to do this work and you're helping so many people. And when you're dead and gone and you're back in heaven and your little family is all put together, you're going to go, that was awful going through it. But look at what we've created through all of us playing these roles in this bigger part of this movie that we've survived. So kudos to you, girl. I'm so impressed with everything you're doing. From your research, what obviously, other than small children, but what are the other nuances of being a young widow? Or are there other nuances of being a young widow versus being what, an old widow or a widow in middle aged? Or, what do you do? Young widow versus an old widow? And how old do you have to be to qualify as a young widow?
All of this comes with qualifications. So I didn't create this number, but the way the research has defined it is 50 and below is classified as young widow. However, as a young widow, but however, in this parenting study that I was telling you about, there are widows who are in their 60s that have young children because now people are having children at an older age. And so what that means is that you're having a young widowhood experience, even though you're not technically a young widow. Does that make sense? Because that your family's young. But one of the nuances that I'm exploring, and I'm not saying that this is just among young widows. This could be among older, but I have not seen it there because I hadn't studied that population. Is the sexuality piece. When you lose a sexual partner, I think that like let me back away from the sexual when you lose a sexual partner. When you go through a death experience, a lot of people, and this is why like Yalom and existential kind of theorists say that death and sex are very related, because sex is the antithesis of death. It's like the life force versus death is like the end. And so people, when they go through a bereavement, a lot of times their sexuality is affected, and so I I've heard people talk about this. I even have seen some blogs writing about it. But when I was widowed and I entered into these Facebook groups, there's a whole range of groups. And some of the groups are like for the very sad, depressed, like, I'm going through it, widows with young children or widows and widowers with young children. And then you have this like range of from very serious to very funny widow groups, right? So the widow humor groups, they're the ones that really talk about sex. So I remember going into it, and it was the first time I ever really like laughed out loud. And I stayed up laughing till like 2 in the morning because everyone's talking about sex in this particular group during this season when I walked into this, stepped into this like online group. And basically, it's this idea of like, I'm never gonna have sex again. You know what I mean? This person who I had sex with is dead. And you would think that that doesn't matter because you're too sad for it to matter. It is one of the first things that people think about, not because they want to have sex. I mean, you have no sexual desire, obviously, at the beginning, but it's this idea of like, oh my God, I lost the one person that I could have intimacy with, and that's gone. It's over. Like, I'm never, like, you in that moment feel like this is never going to happen for me. And so then there are memes that I saw that it's, you have to make fun of yourself because, like, or otherwise you're going to cry.
What's the term to describe that? You told me this and I said, "What? I never heard of this." Yeah.
Widow's fire.
Widow's fire. I'd never heard of that until you told me about it, and I said, "What is that?" Yeah.
Yes. So that's the first. So I can tell you about that. Like, widow's fire is this obsessive and unbidden. Like, nobody is asking for this because it's very difficult to go through it. It's this unbidden surge of sexual desire and obsessive thoughts about sex that come up after you lose your spouse. And I heard a lot of young widows talking about it. It's like, putting memes of like day 345 without sex. My barber accidentally pulled my hair and I called him daddy. It's just like people are making fun of themselves, you know, of because everyone's missing and it was and so then people are really talking about having this longing and they're like, is it wrong? Am I crazy for wanting sex? Am I crazy that this is all I can think about? So as I read that and I went to the literature and I was like, this is actually not in there. This is not being written about. So I decided to do this study to describe what widow's fire is. And so the first paper on widow's fire was to describe, what is it like to lose a sexual partner and how do your feelings change? And not everyone goes through this, but the people who do go through widow's fire, the first thing they talk about is like immediate loss of desire, but a real acknowledgement and a visceral acknowledgement that what they lost sexually was catastrophic. They know that immediately, you know. Or very quickly, they begin to realize, "Oh my god," like, the one person who I wasn't embarrassed to be naked in front of, the one person that loved me for who I was, who saw me before children and after children. Because when you're widowed in your 30s or in your 40s, you're, like, already not feeling as beautiful as you felt when you were younger, so that immediately begins like, "Oh my god, when is this ever gonna happen for me again? And then am I ever gonna be comfortable enough to do this again? But I want to." You know what I mean? So it's just like you're stuck between this rock and hard place. And so people feel very ashamed of themselves when they feel this surge of sexual desire because it really goes against grief norms. Like you're not supposed to be desirous of sex when you're that sad. And you're not supposed to be desirous of sex when you lose the person who you were having sex with. So all those things people begin to feel like they're monsters. Like, what is wrong with me? Like, please stop. I don't want anyone to know that I'm going through this. I'm so embarrassed. There's a lot of shame around it. And so what happens is that, when somebody dies, you have to kind of reconstruct your sense of self, especially if it's a spouse, because through their eyes, you know yourself. If they thought you were sexy and beautiful, then you feel that you're sexy and beautiful. And for some reason, being sexy and beautiful is not important until you lose a person who told you were sexy and beautiful. And all of a sudden, that becomes the most important thing in your life. And that's what Widow's Fire does. This urgency forces you to contend with what in the heck am I going to do that I'm feeling all these feelings. I want to have sex. And most of the times people want to have sex with their deceased spouse. So that already brings so much grief up. Because it's like I want to drink coffee with you. I want to eat breakfast with you. I just want to hug from you. I just want to have sex with you. Anytime those urges and those yearnings come in any arena, it's very painful. But then people begin to realize at some point they're not coming back. You go through these waves of unbidden, like horrible, horrifying memories as your brain is trying to understand what happened. And then to balance that out, you have numbness. So then like that's what we all kind of go through. It's like this like a lot of replaying of terrible things and numbness. And so then you're just experiencing bad or nothing. Bad or nothing. And so in that nothingness, Widow's Fire makes you feel alive again. Like, oh my God, I actually work. I still have feelings, like I still have something that's because you feel like a chip was removed from me that made me human. I remember the first time I even experienced that, I was like, oh my God, I feel something, even though I always felt something terrible, but it felt like this numbness of pain. I don't even know how to explain it. And so people are like, maybe it's our body's way of reminding us we're living. And then the second reason they say it's our body's way of yearning for the connection we lost.
And you're shedding light on it. Changing topics, I want to switch to traumatic bereavement for a minute. My grandfather was a detective in the Columbus, Ohio Police Department and was killed in the line of duty in 1938. My Meemaw was 36, my beloved Meemaw, and my mom was 12 and my uncle was 10. And they wanted my grandmother to testify during this bank robbers trial, and she was so distraught she couldn't talk on the witness stand. So the judge let her go. Fast forward 50 years, I'm at her house and I was with a girlfriend and I asked her a question about it. And she handed me this scrapbook. They had this heroes parade for him for his funeral. And she stayed in the kitchen while I looked through his stuff and she did not want to talk about it 50 years later. And I thought, traumatic bereavement. I mean, you talk about that. And I thought, my Meemaw went through that. And at her funeral, She died 6 weeks shy of 100. The police chief was there. Now, Columbus is big. Columbus is 1.5 million, 2 million people. The police chief was there. They had a special escort for her. They said the bagpiper. It was amazing. So, traumatic bereavement, there was nothing for her back then. And one of his buddies was a boxing manager, and he had a boxing match for her to raise money to pay off her mortgage because they didn't have any insurance. There
Yeah.
wasn't police insurance back then. Now there's the PBF, the Police Benevolence Fund or something, but back then they didn't have anything. So they had a boxing match and they raised enough money to pay off her mortgage, which was $29 a month back
Wow.
then in 1938. And her brothers-in-law tried to take her kids away from her because they said she couldn't support him. She was single. I mean, what was she gonna do? I can't even imagine what she went through. So, talk to us about traumatic bereavement. The bank robber died in the electric chair. They executed him.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it was a big deal, and there's all these articles and stuff about it that's in the family, history, and I could even research it online if I wanted to know more, but I think about her, and I think, "How did she survive that?"
Oh my goodness. First of all, like I just feel so much pain and I feel the empathy that you feel for her and I feel that too. Just it's so painful to know people who you love so dearly have gone through such tragedies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all these years
I'm
later it
named for
continues.
her.
Oh, are you named after her?
Yeah, she was Julia Ann and I'm Julie Ann. And, I was her favorite. All my siblings will tell you that, all my cousins. But, yeah, I think as I was her namesake,
Yeah.
and I'm very, very, very close. Yeah. So, back then there wasn't anything. And then she told her brothers-in-law over her dead body they were gonna take her kids away from her. And I remember my mother saying that every Sunday they would go to the cemetery to visit his grave after church, and she would just cry for 2 hours.
Oh, honey. Oh my goodness. That breaks
So,
my heart.
I know.
Yeah.
That's traumatic bereavement in my book.
Yeah, traumatic bereavement and possibly, I don't know, but so there's several things. Traumatic bereavement, definitely what she went through is the type of death that is a premature death or it's violent, or caused by self or others out of order, and so she had several elements. Like there's the elements of violence here, the elements of it being she was so young, 30. I was also 36 when Brent died, and so just all these and having to tell her children, like she went through all the trauma of all of these things. Um,
And it was during the Depression too, keep that
Oh,
in mind.
Lord. Oh,
Let's just complicate things a
yeah, let's
few
complicate
notches.
things. Oh, goodness. And the financial, that's one of the things that the research has shown is that when you have financial stress, like very significant financial stress, it can complicate your bereavement process. And so one of the things, I don't know if you've heard of prolonged grief, and there's or complicated grief, but there's a lot of in the grief world, people are like, "Well, don't pathologize grief." But the what I feel like is important to understand is that, when you lose someone, you're going to hurt for the rest of your life. And then when you hurt them lose them in a traumatic way, not only do you have to deal with the learning to live without them, the learning to love them in physical separation, and the learning to manage the pain. Because those are the three big things that you have to do when somebody dies. You also have to deal with the trauma. And sometimes because the trauma is so overwhelming to you, you cannot even deal with the grief, And so then it's hard to process. And processing does not mean, oh, I'm going to get over it. But processing means I'm trying to accommodate my life so that I can accept that this happened, so that I can learn to live, and manage the pain and regulate emotionally and things like that. And so I really struggled tremendously with pain and pain dysregulation, and for years, for 3 years, I was just disabled by my grief, but at first it was the trauma. Like, I was having flashbacks, and I had PTSD after my husband died, and it became hard to even shower, because the water on my face would remind me that he had drowned, and, so it, like, really disabled me, and so dealing with the trauma did not allow me to do the things that are helpful in being able to process the grief. So this is why traumatic bereavement can be so difficult, because you got two different things happening: trauma and then loss. And one sometimes is subsumed under the other, And so for people with traumatic bereavement, sometimes even remembering the loved one brings up so much trauma for them that they can't even approach it. You know what I'm saying? Like what you're saying, like they can't talk about it, they can't think
50
about
years
it.
later, she couldn't
Yes.
talk about it.
It's raw. It's just as raw as the day it happened, as the moment that it happened. And so, with prolonged traumatic bereavement sometimes can make people predisposed to prolonged grief, which what that is, I think one of the, because I experienced that. And one of the central things is that the raw pain you feel in those early days does not dissipate that much. And so you feel that forever. I mean, you feel that until and there is a treatment for it to help people. And I did go through the treatment. I felt like it saved my life, but prolonged grief is just this intense, horrific pain that, now I don't feel it in the same way that I used to for those 3 years, and it can shorten your life because your body is not meant to have that much stress. And, I remember 3 years after Brent died over the summer, like, I started losing my hair. I started having infection after infection that they could not explain what was happening. And it was because of all those years, those 3 years, I hardly slept. I hardly took care of myself. I was just surviving my life and just waiting to die. That's really what I was waiting for, just to die, because I couldn't see a future without my husband in it, you know? And so, and I avoided a lot of reminders that he had ever been alive. Like, I couldn't hear his voice. I couldn't, like, I didn't sleep on our bed for 3 years. I never went back to our room, and so there were,
But your son probably saved your life.
my son kept me going.
Yeah, I bet.
My son kept me going, and at the same time, like, seeing his pain, there's this, you're in this double bind. If you have children, they keep you going, and they also hurt you. Not that they hurt you, but their suffering hurts you. But if you don't have children, you don't have that purpose. So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, I feel like, with this. But I think traumatic bereavement can lead to this situation where even years later, I can't talk about it. I can't approach it. And I heard there was a case study of a woman who for 10 years could not sleep if she was not in her husband's grave. And so people can live with this horrific pain for years because something happened in the grieving process. And it's not just trauma, sometimes it's other things. Like if you had any fault, or if you thought you were at fault for the death, it just makes it hard to accept the reality. And by accepting does not mean I like it. It just means to accommodate to a reality you didn't want.
So there is therapy now to help people who are grieving go through that, like what you did, because it sounds to me like what you're saying is it is a form of PTSD.
No, it could very well. So PTSD is the like most dramatic um presentation of trauma, and so but I think a lot of widows have trauma, or young widows have, like how your grandmother and myself, like, we lose our spouses in these sudden, unexpected, terrifying, or very quickly dying to cancer, those kinds of, so those are all traumatic bereavements. And so so PTSD is the full-blown diagnosis, but that doesn't mean you're not experiencing trauma. Like, research shows that even 2 to 4 years after the death of a young partner, people are experiencing significant trauma symptoms. So that doesn't just go away. So you need treatment for trauma, but then if the trauma complicates the grief, so that's like an organ system failing, and then another organ system and another organ starting to fail. You know what I mean? Then you start having system failure. To me, that is how I experienced it. I experienced that I was slowly falling apart.
So what are the options for grieving people nowadays, like versus 1938 for my Mima? But in nowadays, if somebody finds themselves in the position that you were in or that my Mima was in, what are they looking for in a therapist or a counselor? Or are there free or pro bono kind of centers that they can go to? Is there something online that they can do? How can they help not only in traumatic grief and bereavement, but also just in regular, run of the mill horrific grief when a loved one is lost?
Yeah. So, I okay, so several things. One is that what people say is that most people will not need support beyond social support because people tend to be able to somehow accommodate to the loss, and then there's several layers of support that are needed depending on how much you're suffering and struggling. And some people don't like, as horrific as loss is, people are able to demonstrate this amazing resilience and within time accommodate and they're okay. Now, when people go on to be disabled by it for long periods of time, like I was, and probably like how your Mima may have been, there is there's information. So the Center for Prolonged Grief at Columbia University, they have trainings for practitioners, um, to just teach them about prolonged grief because grief is not really well understood in society, even in counseling programs or in social work programs. People still kind of still talk about the Kubler-Ross, stages of grief model, which has been debunked in research. Like that's not like you don't
It
start.
has.
Yes, there's never
Wow.
been
I hadn't
any.
heard that.
Mhm. There's never been any real, support for people actually going through these stages, because they talk about, like, the first one is the state is, like, shock and denial, but really what research has shown that yearning is what people experience the most. That's a predominant feeling, and yearning is not missing. Missing is a nostalgia of the back, like, "Oh, I remember when we used to." Yearning is like, "I want this now." Like, "I want this valued thing right now," and that's what makes you feel so much pain because, every time you get a reminder that we used to do this together, "Oh, I wish they were here right now." Oh my God, it comes with so much anguish. And when you're widowed, you get those reminders constantly. It's different than if you like saw them once a year or you saw them every couple months. It's like, I brush my teeth. Oh God, they used to do this. I take care of my kid. Oh God, they used to do this. So you're in this constant pain. And that level of pain can really destabilize a person. It can make them like, I'm too overwhelmed. I got to take care of my kids. I can't be in pain all the time. So they begin to avoid, so that avoidance can sometimes lead to this other stuff. So the Center of Prolonged Grief at Columbia University, they train practitioners, and that's where I found my therapist. She has been amazing. So right now there's a protocol. Oh, there's only one that I know of, for prolonged grief treatment, but there might be more written by Kathy Shear and her team. And basically this protocol is what it does is that it helps you to, with the support of the therapist, to face the grief and trauma of the grief. You know what I mean? So to face it and to um start like coming towards your grief instead of fighting it. So one of the first things that I had to start doing was journaling. Every day I had to journal what was my high of pain, what was my low of pain, what was happening when I had the high, what was happening when I had the low, and what was the average throughout the day. How did I feel? And I was like, I didn't understand why we were doing it initially. And then I was began to realize that's just you reconnecting with your grief because I was so used to just holding my breath and just powering through and working. And even though I was always in pain, I didn't want to feel it. So I was just like, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to think about it. That was so bad for me, And so that started that. And then we did other exercises and, like writing down from like most scared to least scared of activities that you've been avoiding that you need to do in order to rearrange your life and accommodate for this loss. So there were so many things that I had not taken care of. I was too afraid to approach it. Like even including clothes that I used to wear when he was alive. I just couldn't look at them anymore. I was just avoiding, even though I thought about him all day long, I was avoiding because I was so afraid of the pain. So there were things that we did, and it was a hard protocol to go through. It was brutal, and it should have been what the research shows. It's a 16-week protocol. I had to do it over 9 months. It was so destabilizing at times, and so my therapist would realize that she'd say, "Okay, let's pause this. Let's help you get through this." And several people died while I was going through it, and so then we had to pause it, take. So my therapist was amazing. Her name is Sonia Lott, and she's on that website. So unfortunately, I don't think that there's pro bono, but I really wish there was because so many widows, but there's other people who go through it. But young widows, there's a lot of young widows that I'm reading the Facebook forums. I'm like, they're years out and an incredible amount of pain. And this is not to judge to say, oh, you're not allowed to hurt, but it's destabilizing and it's disabling. You
For
know,
not only the widow, but for their children as well.
they lose the other parent. They lose the other parent. Yeah. Like I feel like it's very traumatic for children to lose one parent and watch the other parent suffer like this. And even, I had a friend who told me that her mother would take them to the gravesite every weekend also, and it being a hard memory. It's like, I don't want to do this, but it's almost like you're stuck here because your parent needs this. And the parents begin to struggle to attune to their children when they're stuck in mental health issues. So it's like research shows that mothers with postpartum depression or PTSD, they can't even hear their kid crying in the same way that kids with parents without this have. You know what I mean? Like, your ability to hear your child even is challenged because you're in so much distress. So that becomes, that's why I feel like that's part of why I'm doing the Young Widowhood Project, is because I'm really concerned for the widow, but also really concerned for the children of a widowed family.
Well, my Mima, God bless her, went to work and, put both of her kids through 12 years of private Catholic schools. Both of them graduated from college. Both of them had wonderful careers, and she was, orphaned when she was in 8th grade
Oh,
and went to
goodness.
work full time. So
Oh, goodness.
her parents, she were gone when she was 14 and didn't even finish the 8th grade, and she was an only child. And so I think about the trauma that she went through, but God bless her to power through, and she had a lot of joy when, when we were born, when the grandkids, it was like once the grandkids were born, it was a different situation, and then when the great-grandkids were born, oh, man, that was just like a whole new ball game for her, and that's what brought her the most joy, was the babies and, and new life and all of that. Speaking of that, a couple more questions as we're winding down. I could talk to you for hours. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom with us. I know it's helping a lot of people. And if it's not somebody who's a young widow that's listening, we all know people that know someone that this information is going to help. So, what can the family do to support their young widow and whether they have children or not? What's the most helpful if you named like 2 or 3 things that the family could do to help that widow feel supported, what would they be?
So I think the first thing is, realize that this is a long haul for them. It's going to be years of hurting, and so that they're going to be going through milestones in their lives where their partner would have been there. And so just being mindful, like anniversaries, their birthdays, anything special in their lives has now taken on this. It used to be joyful, now it's sad as well as joyful, or tragic as well as joyful. And so, like, realizing that their loved one, their widow and their family is gonna hurt for a really long time, and maybe for the lifetime. Maybe for a lifetime, but they're gonna be in, like, the intense acute pain for a really long time. And so, like, to just help them feel like they're not alone, just remember them. Just see, hey, like, "Hey, I know that this is your anniversary. I know that that was hard. That must have been hard for you." Remembering them on their anniversaries, remembering them on their birthdays, remembering them on their partner's birthdays, like, they still continue to celebrate and love and honor their partner throughout the rest of their lives? So I know, like, for me in February, I start, struggling because that was my husband's birthday, and so I begin to struggle, and people who remember that are like, "Hey, I know that you were going through a hard time." That just helps me to know I'm not alone. And the other thing is to not expect, people want you to get better, and you feel the pressure from other people that they want you to get better, and you're like, I'm not getting better, and I can't hurry it along. So just one of the most helpful things that one of my friends told me at like 9 or 10 months after Brent died, she said, Liza, I know you're about to come on the 1 year anniversary, and I want you to know that there's no pressure from us that you get better. Like, if you're a mess, if you're a hot mess like you are now, at the 1 year mark and beyond, we'll be here. And if you're like that at 8 years, we'll be here. Like, we don't want you to feel this way. But if you are, it's okay. So I think letting me be a hot mess and accepting me, just like, oh, come along, and if I'm crying, oh, she's crying, let's give her a hug and let's carry on. That just made me feel like I wasn't isolated, because when people begin to feel like, "Oh, you're still struggling like that?" Like, we know that people get tired of us. We know this. But when people tell you, "I'm not tired of you, like, if you need to cry, we'll cry and then let's go do our thing." Just make me feel normal. Tell me your problems too. So I would say that, like, remember it's a long haul, and don't as hard as it is for you, and I recognize this, that as a bystander, it's traumatic to watch someone you love fall
Yeah.
apart in this way. Like I
Right.
know this. So try to take care of yourself. If you need breaks from them, take them. Like they don't expect you to be there for them all the time, but also that don't disappear fully. Like you just go, take a break, and then come back. My family used to tossed me around like a volleyball. My mom would call my sister to be like, come pick her up. I can't take it anymore. I can't see her crying like this. So my sister would pick me up and take me to their house, and then they'd be like, okay, I'm done. Like, go pick her up. And I had no idea this was all happening in the background. They were just coordinating so they could survive watching me fall apart, and so that, just kind of like it's a long haul. And yes, yeah.
Great suggestions. I know you're in a new relationship. Tell us, how did you know that it was time for you, or did it just happen, just kind of out of the blue and you just took step by step, or just tell us real briefly about that?
About this one, it just happened. We met at dance school, and but I felt like I knew that I was ready because I'd had one previous relationship before this one that I had thought I was ready to start dating. My therapist had told me, you need to start dating because, like, I wore my rings for 14 months, and then I had all this anger that he had abandoned me. And she was like, he didn't abandon you, he's dead. She's like, can you start acting single? Is there any way you can start, like, to behave in a way that lets you know that you're single? So I thought, okay, it's been 14 months, I should try. And it was very painful. But what was different then when I had my first relationship at versus now is that I don't, like, I feel there's space for both. I don't have to hide my love for Brent, and I have a lot of love for Henry. You know what I mean? Like, they're both great loves, and I'm okay I mean, sometimes I'm not okay with it. Sometimes I'm so confused about, like, "Hold on, how does this even work?" But my heart is okay with holding space, and I feel that Brent's okay with it, and Henry's okay with it? So I think that the biggest way that I've known so far as it's evolved is that there's space for both, and that I'm not sitting there yearning for Brent while I'm with Henry. I think that was something that was happening to me in my previous relationship where I would be yearning and then I would feel guilty. So I thought I'm cheating on the new guy, because I'm sitting here wishing it was Brent, and not wishing that it wasn't this person, but just wishing that Brent was around, and that would make me feel so anxious because I'm a monogamous girl, like I'm like a one person. And so to feel like I'm with one person and wanting to be with another, that didn't feel right. And it didn't happen until after I got into the relationship. You know what I'm saying? So then I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? Like, what's wrong with me? And now I miss Brent. I hear Brent's voice in my heart. Brent will always be a part of me. He's an ancestor. He's a great love. And there's space for the new person.
No,
Mm.
wonderful. Last question. Why do we incarnate?
Why do we incarnate? Uh-huh. I hear, and this kind of makes sense to me, is to learn to love. I hear that. That I've heard from people that I think it's so that we learn to love in a deeper way. So we have the human experience and the suffering that comes with it and the joys. They teach us how to love better. I think that's why. I don't know what do you think?
Well, and I think for you, it's obvious that you're expanding your love for all those young widows out there in the world who are benefiting from your counseling and your research and your wisdom. And as somebody who's been there and has survived. So that's a different kind of love, perhaps, than what you ever thought you'd be involved in. But certainly just as beneficial and just as what's the word I'm looking for? Not efficient, but just as much of an experience as romantic love or familial love or something like that. You're just doing it, and you're doing it in a way that's different because you're sharing love with people who you will never meet, and you're sending them love, and you're affecting their lives in profound ways, you and your team that's doing this research. And for you to have the courage to share this such intimate stuff about your own life is just remarkable. So I just think you're so extraordinary, and I'm grateful for you and for the work that you're doing and how you're benefiting people from all over the world. So carry on, my girl. You're doing remarkable things. How can people learn more about you and your work?
So I am on a Facebook platform and an Instagram platform called the Widowed Researcher. And there you can connect with the Young Widowhood Project and also a podcast that I just started. It's still very much slowly building up, but it's called Widow Pod, the stories and research of young widows. And so I also have academic papers that if people ask me for, I'm happy to share them. I have some of them linked also in my bio. So that's where I can find
Yeah,
me.
wonderful. And anybody listening who's been through this, you are welcome to a free copy of my book, Angelic Attendants: What Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next. Just go to julieryangift.com and we'll give you a free digital and audiobook download. And it's about how we're surrounded by angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets. And that's my parting comment to you. Brent was surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones and deceased pets when he passed. So I hope that gives you some comfort
Yes.
as well. Yeah. Thank you for coming by and talking with all of us today. Lots for us to all think about, gosh, if we're in this position or we know somebody who is, please share this video with them. And I envision people will watch this multiple times because there's so many golden nuggets here. In the meantime, sending you lots of love from Sweet Home Alabama, mwah, and from Texas too,
Mwah.
where Dr. Liza is. We'll see you next time. To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.